Israeli leaders pledged the elimination of Hamas and an end to its hold on Palestinian government institutions. As the truce collapses, what lies ahead for the Gaza Strip and 1.5 million desperate Palestinians trapped inside? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome. I'm Imran Garda. Both top candidates competing to become Israel's next prime minister have vowed publicly to topple Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Such statements by the Likud party chief Benjamin Netanyahu and the foreign minister Tzipi Livni were considered election campaign talk. But as Livni is received in Cairo by President Hosni Mubarak to discuss the situation in Gaza, Israel made no secret of its preparations for a more substantial military offensive against Hamas.
Hamas need to understand that our aspiration to live in peace doesn't mean that Israel is going to take this kind of situation any longer. Enough is enough. And while we are working with the pragmatic leaders, trying to change the situation on the ground in the West Bank, we cannot tolerate a situation in which Hamas continues to target Israel, Israel's citizens, and this situation is going to be changed.
Tzipi Livni there. Now, joining us now are our guests in Jerusalem, Ephraim Inbar. He's a professor of political science at Bar Ilan University and former Israeli army paratrooper. In Cairo, Dr. Abdullah Al-Ash'al. He's a professor of international law at the American University in Cairo and a former assistant to the Egyptian foreign minister. And in Ramallah, Dr. Mustafa Al-Barghouti. He's the General Secretary of the Palestinian National Initiative and former Palestinian Minister of Information. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Let's start off in Jerusalem with Mr. Inbar. Tzipi Livni says enough is enough. What does she hope to achieve in Cairo?
I think that she represents the general popular view of the Israeli society. It feels that the recent attacks by Hamas are not to be tolerated anymore. I think that Israelis feel that they've done exactly what the international community wanted them to do in Gaza. They left Gaza, they removed their settlements, and what they received in return is waves of missiles which continue to pour on Israeli citizens. And this is something which Israelis find unacceptable.
Well, what about the fact that there's a sort of collective punishment on the people of Gaza and a siege on the 1.6 million people in Gaza? Has that not created the conditions that have led to rocket attacks on southern Israel?
I don't think this is the issue, because when the Israelis left Gaza, they expected to be quiet on their border, and as long as there is quiet, we have no opposition to continue sending electricity, water, and even when they were shooting missiles, we've done those things. We must understand that what's happening in Gaza is a government which is dedicated to the destruction of the State of Israel, and it is a popular government. It has been elected by the people. Unfortunately, Hamas, a radical Islamic organization, is quite popular among the Palestinians. And it is true that the Palestinians in Gaza suffer, but this is what happens to all societies that go to war.
Sorry, that's very interesting. That's a very interesting thing you said there, because it sounds very similar to what Osama bin Laden says. He says the United States elected their leadership, they do bad things in the Middle East, so therefore civilians are fair game. It sounds to be a similar type of ideology.
I must say that I think the similarity with bin Laden is Hamas rather than the Israelis. I don't remember during World War II the American sending humanitarian convoys to Hitler and to his people. I think it's unacceptable to see 1.5 million people fighting against Israel, and we should supply them with food. They had the opportunity to turn Gaza into a Singapore, into a Hong Kong, but they prefer to turn it into a Hamastan. I think this is their choice, and it is their responsibility, and if they suffer, too bad.
Too bad, Mustafa al-Barghouti. Your response?
Well, as usual, the Israeli spokespeople are spreading lies and misleading information. I must start with the basic piece of information that was given that keeps to be repeated, that Israel left Gaza. When did Israel leave Gaza? Israel never left Gaza. The Israeli occupation continues in Gaza. That's why the Israeli army continues to control the water of Gaza. That's why fishermen are shot at by the Israeli army if they go beyond 6 miles inside the sea. Israel controls all the passages to Gaza. That's why there is a siege on Gaza. How could Israel have left Gaza if Rafah, even crossing with Egypt, is still under Israeli control? How did Israel leave Gaza when its airplanes continue to fly over Gaza around the clock, scan Gaza, shoot missiles sometimes, assassinate people sometimes? Israel is still occupying Gaza, but it changed the form of occupation. And as an occupying power, it is trying to deny and negate its obligation according to 4th Geneva Convention, which says an occupying power is responsible for the safety and well-being of the people that are occupied. So the basic element here is that Israel continues to occupy Gaza. The second point, he claimed that the Palestinians continued to shoot missiles at Israel while Israel was very peaceful and calm. We had a ceasefire that all Palestinian groups agreed with, and the side that violated the ceasefire was Israel. It was Israel that conducted one attack, second attack, third attack, and continued also to assassinate Palestinians in the West Bank till there was a reaction. So the side that violated the ceasefire was Israel. But let's be honest here and say the truth. The truth is that during the last year of the so-called Annapolis peace process, the Israeli army has killed 546 Palestinians, including 76 children. Of course, there were 16 Israeli victims, most of whom were soldiers during combat attacking Palestinian people. But 546 Palestinians were killed. One last very important point. I see what is happening today is that the Israeli politicians, whether it's Livni, Netanyahu, or even Barak, are all nothing but servants of the huge military-industrial complex in Israel, which aims at escalating the situation into a new war. It doesn't care about the lives of Palestinians or Israelis that will be lost in this war. This whole propaganda escalation is about preparing the Israeli community for another war, for another attack, for another losses on the both sides, the Palestinians and Israelis, to serve the interest of the military complex, which wants to continue to export military equipment to the world, security system to the world, which has made Israel the 4th largest military exporter to the world. This is a wrong policy, and it must stop, and it will lead to escalation everywhere.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the mediator now. Abdullah al-Ash'al, Egypt has been mediating. Egypt brokered that 6-month truce, which has recently expired. What would you make of those who would say Egypt is more a party to the conflict rather than a mediator?
No, I don't think Egypt is a party to this conflict, because Egypt, in fact, according to the peace treaty, was far away from any obligations in the area. And it is even not neutral in this conflict, because Egypt, in fact, is very much committed to the side of Israel. Let me say very frankly, Egypt, in fact, had mediated so as to conclude this peace or this appeasement agreement. And this appeasement agreement, in fact, has obligations on Egypt and on Israel, as well as on Hamas and other organizations. But unfortunately, Egypt and Israel violated this appeasement agreement, because Egypt has obligation to open Rafah crossing. And Israel had to lift the embargo, which is imposed now on a blockade on Gaza. So Egypt, in fact, is supporting Israel in genociding the Palestinians in Gaza. And this is a crime which is currently taking place now before the whole world. And I think that Israel now is trying to complete that, because the policy of Israel, which had been declared today publicly by Mrs. Livni in Egypt, that it is going to extricate, to abolish totally Hamas from the equation. So this policy of excluding Hamas totally from life and from the political equation in the area, I think this is very wrong, because Israel, which had been implanted here in this area, did not respect the rules of neighborhood and the international law rules. So in this case, we feel in Egypt that, in fact, the government of Egypt has to do a lot so as to press Israel. And Egypt never pressed Israel at all. It is, in fact, taking a very lenient policy, and we have a quarrel with the Egyptian government here in Egypt concerning the gas, which is exported in a very scandalous way to Israel. So while Gaza is suffering, and while Israel is, in fact, genociding the Gazans now, Egypt, in fact, didn't say anything.
Okay,
so if Egypt is
sorry
a mediator,
to interrupt you, sir.
It has to do something.
Abdullah Al-Ashal, sorry to interrupt you. Let's go to Ephraim Imbar for a response to that. Mr. Imbar, Mr. Al-Ashal says that Egypt is actually taking sides. It's on your side rather than being an honest broker. What do you make of that?
I think that this is to a great extent true. The current regime in Egypt is very much afraid of the rise of an Islamic radical regime in Gaza, and it is on the horn of a dilemma. On one hand, it doesn't want this regime to succeed. On the other hand, it is afraid of the masses in Egypt, which are increasingly radicalized and increasingly under the influence of the Muslim Brothers, a radical Muslim organization. And of course, they would prefer Israel to do the dirty job for them. And this is precisely why they are also closing the Gaza Strip from their side.
Okay, gentlemen, don't go away. It's time for a short break. When we come back, we look at the different possible scenarios for the evolving situation in Gaza. Do stay with us.